We think heartbreak is a punishment. We ask, why did they leave? Why now? But what if absence is not an ending? What if it's a sacred rearranging? Sometimes God removes what your heart clings to, not because he wants to wound you, but because he's clearing the path for what your soul prayed for when you thought no one was listening. We often mistake divine detachment for punishment. When someone leaves, we translate absence as abandonment, assuming that if God truly cared, he would have let them stay. We hold on to people as if their presence is the guarantee of our worth, as if their departure invalidates our story. But what if loss is not a wound, but a whisper? What if the removal is not cruelty, but clarity? Think about it. How many times in your life have you prayed for peace only to watch chaos unravel first? How often have you asked for purpose and then felt everything familiar fall apart? It feels cruel, doesn't it? The timing never seems right. The people you thought would walk beside you forever suddenly disappear. The relationships that once felt like home begin to feel foreign. You don't understand why, and in that confusion, you begin to believe you've been forsaken. But what if this is how protection sounds? Quiet, disruptive, necessary. Sometimes God doesn't send storms to destroy you. He allows endings to redirect you. What you call rejection may be his way of saying, this isn't where your story flourishes. You see, when God removes someone, it's rarely because they were evil or because you were unworthy. It's because the alignment that once existed between you has reached its divine expiration date. Their role in your evolution is complete. Their chapter in your book has closed, not in anger, but in purpose. We struggle with this because we confuse attachment with belonging. We think if someone leaves, it means something is wrong with us. But attachment is often about safety, not truth. It's about familiarity, not freedom. God knows that what feels safe can sometimes keep you small. He will disrupt what is comfortable to deliver you into what is destined. You may be praying for expansion while clinging to what confines you. And so, in his mercy, he removes what you refuse to release. And yes, it hurts. Of course it hurts. Losing someone who once felt essential feels like losing part of yourself. You replay the moments. You question every word. You wonder what you could have done differently. That ache in your chest, that's your heart adjusting to the new room being made. Pain is not proof of punishment. It's evidence of transformation. It means you're alive, growing, being stretched towards something larger than what your comfort zone could contain. There is something profoundly sacred about endings. We often think of them as failure, but endings are also invitations. When someone exits your life, you are invited to meet yourself again without their shadow, without their voice defining your worth. You're asked to see who you are when no one else is holding the mirror. This is where divine protection reveals its quiet brilliance in the solitude that feels unbearable, but is actually making you whole. Sometimes God removes someone because he heard conversations you didn't. He saw choices you couldn't. He recognized that staying connected to them would limit the fullness of who you're becoming. So instead of explaining, he acts. And though his silence may break your heart, it's also what saves it. He won't let you stay where you don't belong, even if you beg him to, because he knows the longer you hold on to something that's no longer meant for you, the more it begins to harm what's still meant to grow within you. This isn't rejection. This is redirection wrapped in grace. The removal isn't a verdict, it's a mercy. It's God's way of saying, you've outgrown what once felt necessary. You're not being punished. You're being protected from a smaller version of your future. You see, the people who were right for your past may not be equipped for your next chapter. They taught you what you needed to know, offered what they could, and left when their purpose was fulfilled. To cling to them beyond that moment is to resist the divine rhythm of your own life. Sometimes love doesn't fail, it finishes. And in that finishing, something new begins. When you start to see detachment through this lens, peace slowly replaces panic. Gratitude begins to whisper where grief once shouted. You start to realize that what left your life didn't take your purpose with it. It simply created space for something that fits who you are becoming. The removal wasn't God's way of hurting you. It was his way of healing you. Akeke didn't take them away to break you. He took them away to make room for what's next. Between loss and renewal lies a space that most of us are desperate to escape. It's that quiet, uneasy gap where everything familiar has fallen away and the new thing God promised hasn't yet arrived. It's the in-between, the waiting room of transformation. And it's here, in this silence, that our faith is tested the most. We live in a culture that rushes to fill emptiness. The moment something ends, we reach for distraction. We scroll, we plan, we replace. We do anything to avoid sitting in that aching space between what was and what will be. But this is the space where the soul does its deepest work. Because when God removes something, He doesn't instantly replace it. He allows a pause, not to punish, but to prepare. In that stillness, all your noise surfaces. The doubts, the fears, the unanswered questions you've buried under busyness begin to speak. You start to confront the truth you avoided when you were surrounded by noise, that maybe you were holding on too tightly, that maybe the loss you're mourning was never meant to last forever. This is the uncomfortable gift of the in-between. It reveals what you've been afraid to see. You might feel like you've lost direction, like you're standing in a hallway full of closed doors, not knowing which one will open. You pray, you wait, and the silence feels deafening. But what if this silence isn't absence? What if it's incubation, a time when God is forming something you can't yet perceive? Growth doesn't always announce itself with noise or motion. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it feels like nothing is happening, when in truth, everything is. Think of the seed beneath the soil. You don't see it breaking, stretching, or growing roots. From the surface, it looks lifeless. But deep underground, it's preparing for light. That's you in this season. You're being buried to be built. The in-between is where your unseen growth begins to take shape. God is not withholding, He's weaving. And every delay, every quiet day, every tear that feels wasted is part of that design. It's tempting to interpret stillness as stagnation, to believe that if we're not moving forward, we must be falling behind. But not all movement is progress. Some of the most sacred transitions in life happen in silence, in surrender, in the moments when all you can do is trust that there's purpose in the pause. You may not feel strong right now, but strength is being formed in the waiting. You may not feel ready, but readiness is being cultivated in your surrender. When we rush the process, we rob ourselves of revelation. We try to rebuild too quickly, to fill the emptiness with substitutes, another relationship, another distraction, another goal. But God doesn't bless replacements born out of fear. He blesses restorations born out of trust. There's a reason He lets some seasons feel lonely, because He wants to meet you in the place where no one else can. When the noise fades and there's no one left to validate you, that's when you finally hear the voice that was always guiding you. The in-between teaches you to rely less on outcomes and more on intimacy with God. It teaches you that peace doesn't come from knowing what's next, but from knowing who's with you even when nothing makes sense. This space between loss and renewal is where your dependence shifts from people to purpose, from control to surrender. It's the refining ground where your faith matures from conditional to unshakable. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Transformation always is. You can't become new without first being undone. You can't step into what's next while still clinging to what was. So God gives you this sacred in-between, this wilderness where your identity is redefined. You learn to sit with yourself, to listen instead of fix, to trust instead of panic, to allow the unknown to become your teacher rather than your enemy. Every delay is divine timing disguised. Every closed door is choreography you can't yet comprehend. The waiting season is not a punishment, it's a recalibration. God is aligning what's within you with what's ahead of you. He's teaching you to stand on peace, not on people, to trust the process, not just the promise. You may not understand this season, but one day you'll look back and realize that the space that felt so empty was actually where everything began to grow. You'll see that what felt like silence was the sound of your soul being rewritten. That's the mystery of divine timing. It doesn't rush, it refines. Oh, what feels like waiting is really preparation for what's next. There's a moment after someone leaves or something ends when the silence feels unbearable. You keep asking why. Why did this happen? Why now? Why them? Why me? And no matter how much you analyze it, no answer feels satisfying. But what if the question isn't or why? What if it's where is this leading me? Where is this loss trying to take me that comfort never could? Because sometimes you're not being abandoned. You're being repositioned. Repositioning rarely feels like progress. It feels like being pushed out of what you thought was secure. It feels like confusion, uncertainty, and heartbreak colliding all at once. Yet in God's design, movement doesn't always begin with clarity. Sometimes it begins with disruption. He doesn't move you when you're ready. He moves you when you've stayed too long. And so, what you perceive as rejection may be his gentle or not so gentle redirection. We think of rejection as an insult to our worth, when often it's an invitation to a higher calling. Maybe that door closed not because you failed, but because your spirit was outgrowing the room. Maybe that person didn't walk away to hurt you, but because your next season required space for something they couldn't carry with you. There's a kind of wisdom that only arrives through loss, a clarity that only emerges once the noise of familiarity has faded. We want God's guidance, but we resist his methods. We pray, lead me, but when he starts shifting the ground beneath us, we panic. We forget that divine movement often looks like divine mess. When life starts to rearrange, it's rarely neat. It rarely feels kind. It rarely feels like love. But this is love in its most mature form. Love that refuses to let you stay small. You might feel like everything has been taken from you, but perhaps what's being removed is what kept you limited. You were meant for expansion. And sometimes that means being pulled out of old environments, old identities, old versions of yourself. The things and people that no longer fit your purpose begin to fall away, and the falling feels like failure until you see where it's leading you. Repositioning often looks like loss before it looks like liberation. The job that didn't work out, the relationship that ended, the plan that fell apart. These are not random misfortunes. They're divine relocations. They move you from where you've been surviving to where you're meant to thrive. God doesn't waste pain. He repurposes it. And what feels like the end of something dear is often the beginning of something divine. There's a story being written underneath the surface of what you see. Every time you think, I've been left behind, a God is whispering, you've been positioned ahead. You just can't see it yet because repositioning rarely announces itself with clarity. It demands trust. It demands surrender. It asks you to believe that there's purpose even when there's no proof. You are not being punished. You are being prepared. And the difference between those two truths is perspective. Punishment focuses on what you've lost. Preparation focuses on what's coming. When you shift your perspective, the pain begins to make sense. You start to see that the things that fell apart didn't destroy you. They directed you. The closed door wasn't a denial. It was a detour. Repositioning doesn't just change your circumstances. It changes you. It pulls you out of dependency on what's visible and teaches you to trust the invisible hand that's guiding your life. It breaks your attachment to outcomes so that your peace no longer depends on things working out your way. That's how God matures you, by allowing you to lose what you thought you needed so you can discover who you really are without it. And yes, it hurts. The in-between always does. You'll grieve what was familiar even when you know it's no longer right. You'll question the timing. You'll question yourself. You'll question God. But somewhere in the quiet ache, you'll start to sense that maybe you're not lost. Maybe you're being led. The unfamiliar ground beneath your feet isn't evidence of failure. It's evidence of movement. You're being positioned where purpose meets promise. And even if you can't see it yet, your spirit can feel it. One day, you'll look back and realize that the people who left didn't derail your destiny. They cleared the path for it. The rejections that broke you open were actually divine invitations to step higher. Every shift, every ending, every silence was part of the choreography of grace that brought you exactly where you were meant to be. You're not being abandoned. You're being repositioned for what's next. We say we want new beginnings, but deep down, many of us are still clinging to what ended. We hold on to the people, the memories, the versions of ourselves that no longer fit who we are becoming. Letting go sounds beautiful when it's written in a quote, but in reality, it feels like tearing something sacred from your hands. Because what if that was your only chance? What if you never find that again? What if this ending really means it's over? Those questions haunt us, not because we doubt God's power, but because we don't trust what life looks like without control. Letting go isn't easy because attachment disguises itself as love. It tells you that holding on is noble, that Fighting for what's slipping away makes you loyal. But there comes a moment when your spirit whispers, A, this is not serving you anymore. E, you sense it in the conversations that drain you, in the places that no longer feel like home, in the relationships that used to lift you but now keep you small. God starts to tug gently at your hands, asking you to release what you've already outgrown. And yet you tighten your grip, afraid that letting go means losing everything. The truth is, you can't receive what's next while your hands are still full of what was. God can't fill a heart that's clinging to what he's already asked you to release. Letting go is not rejection of your past. It's respect for your growth. It's acknowledging that something once sacred has fulfilled its purpose. Not all endings are failures. Some are graduations in disguise. We often say, if God wanted it to end, why did he let it begin? But maybe beginnings aren't meant to last forever. Maybe they're meant to shape you, teach you, and then release you. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to awaken a part of you that was asleep. When that lesson is learned, the relationship shifts, the attachment loosens, and that's when we must make a choice to honor the ending as holy or to resist it and keep reliving a season that has already expired. Letting go is a spiritual act. It requires trust, not in what's leaving, but in what remains. It asks you to believe that God doesn't subtract without intention. When he removes something, it's because he's preparing you for what can't coexist with your old attachments. That's why he doesn't always give explanations. He knows that if he told you what's next, you might try to bring your past into it. You see, holding on is often about fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of uncertainty, fear of starting over. We confuse the end of a relationship or a dream with the end of ourselves. But endings are not evidence of absence. They're proof that life is still moving. That's what makes faith so hard. It doesn't eliminate grief. It teaches you to walk through it. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying what's too heavy to hold. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to release them, to say thank you for what we shared, but this version of me can't go where I'm headed. That isn't bitterness, it's reverence. It's honoring the sacredness of what was while creating space for what will be. You can love someone deeply and still know they're not meant for the next chapter of your life. That's not betrayal, that's wisdom. There's also a quiet dignity in surrender. When you finally stop fighting the current and let the tide carry you where it's meant to go, something beautiful happens. Peace returns. The ache doesn't vanish overnight, but the resistance does. And in that surrender, you begin to see the purpose in the pain. You start to realize that maybe you weren't being punished after all. You were being prepared. Letting go will never feel comfortable, but it will always be necessary. Because clinging to what's gone keeps you from seeing what's growing. God can't bring you the promise if you're still worshiping the past. And he's too loving to let you stay where you're shrinking. So when life begins to loosen your grip on something you thought you needed, don't fight it. Don't chase what's trying to leave. Don't beg for what's already blessed you. Instead, trust that the same God who asked you to release will also bring what's meant to remain. Every goodbye creates sacred space for a new hello, one that aligns not with who you were, but with who you're becoming. Letting go isn't losing. It's trusting that what's ahead is worth more than what's behind. Every ending leaves an echo. When someone walks away, when something breaks, when a dream dissolves, you're left standing in the silence, surrounded by questions that have no easy answers. And in that silence, there's an invitation to look not at what left, but at what it revealed. Because the truth is, absence has a language of its own. When something or someone is removed from your life, they leave behind more than emptiness. They leave a message. Pain, though it feels cruel, is rarely meaningless. It has a way of uncovering truths we've been unwilling to face. You start to realize that the absence you're mourning is also the mirror you've been avoiding. You see, we often learn who we are not through the people who stay, but through the ones who leave, the ones who trigger our fears, test our boundaries, and walk away when we can no longer meet their expectations. Their departure pulls back the veil on our deepest needs, our hidden insecurities, and our patterns of attachment. It's in those moments, the ones that break your heart open, that you meet parts of yourself you never knew existed. The part that longs to be chosen. The part that compromises too quickly. The part that mistakes attention for love. The part that fears being alone so deeply it clings to what's unhealthy just to feel safe. And it's not until something or someone is taken away that you finally face these truths. That's the sacred gift of absence. It brings to light what presence kept hidden. You might say, but I didn't deserve this loss. I didn't deserve to be left like that. And maybe you didn't. But what if the purpose wasn't punishment, but perspective? What if this was the only way God could show you what needed healing? Sometimes He doesn't reveal the truth through comfort. He reveals it through contrast. You thought that person was your peace, but now that they're gone, you realize your peace was never meant to depend on them. You thought that relationship was your source of worth, but now you see it was your distraction from self-worth. The pain strips away illusions until only truth remains. When you begin to see loss this way, you stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what is this trying to teach me? Because every heartbreak carries a hidden curriculum. It teaches you what you value, what you tolerate, what you avoid, and what you need to unlearn. It holds up a mirror to your boundaries or your lack of them. It exposes the spaces where you still seek validation instead of alignment. Pain is a teacher that doesn't use words, but it always leaves wisdom behind for those willing to listen. We often think growth happens when life is good, when we're inspired, motivated, moving forward. But real growth often begins in confusion, in emptiness, in endings. Because in those moments, you can't rely on what used to comfort you. You're forced to look inward, to rebuild your foundation on truth instead of illusion. And it's there that God begins His most intimate work, not in the noise of abundance, but in the quiet of loss. Sometimes the lesson isn't about them at all. It's about you, about seeing the ways you shrink yourself to keep the peace, the ways you ignore red flags because you're afraid to start over, the ways you give love in hopes of earning it back. When someone leaves, they don't take your value with them. They reveal where you stopped seeing it for yourself. That's the kind of awakening that only pain can bring. You might not recognize it now, but there's a wisdom being born in your wounds. Every tear, every sleepless night, every unanswered question is shaping your understanding of love, boundaries, and grace. The ones who left didn't take your light. They exposed where you had dimmed it. The ending didn't destroy you. It showed you where you'd forgotten your strength. This is how absence teaches, by dismantling the illusions that kept you attached to what couldn't sustain you. And when the lesson begins to sink in, something shifts. The bitterness fades, the blame softens, gratitude begins to grow quietly in the places that once only held pain. You start to thank God not just for what stayed, but for what left. Because you see now that every removal was a revelation. The absence wasn't punishment, it was protection. It taught you what presence never could. Where every absence carries a lesson, and sometimes what's gone is what finally sets you free. There comes a moment after. Loss. After the storm has settled, after the tears have dried, when you begin to sense that life is quietly asking something of you. Not to go back, not to repair what was, but to rise differently. Because what's next isn't waiting for the old version of you, it's waiting for the version that learned from everything that broke you. The version that no longer confuses comfort with peace or attachment with love. It's easy to pray for new beginnings, but what we often forget is that new beginnings require new identities. The future you prayed for cannot coexist with the habits, fears, and mindsets that kept you trapped in the past. Growth demands that you evolve, that you let the old self dissolve to make space for who you're meant to become. And that process isn't neat. It's not gentle. It asks you to confront the parts of yourself that found safety in dysfunction, that felt seen only in struggle. There's a kind of grief that comes with transformation. You're not just mourning what left, you're mourning who you were when you loved it, the version of you that tolerated less than you deserved, the one who thought survival was strength, the one who built walls instead of boundaries and mistook silence for peace. That person carried you this far, but they can't carry you into what's next. God won't let your future be built on foundations that were never meant to hold it. You may feel the tug, that subtle tension between who you've been and who you're becoming. It feels uncomfortable because change always threatens identity. You start questioning everything, the relationships that no longer feel aligned, the spaces that used to feel safe but now suffocate you, the dreams that once inspired you but no longer fit your soul. That's not confusion. That's evolution. It's God stretching you into a new capacity. He's expanding your heart to hold more purpose, more truth, more authenticity. Sometimes the greatest act of faith isn't believing God will change your circumstances. It's believing He will change you. He will teach you to walk differently, to speak differently, to love differently. You'll start to notice that the same things that once triggered you no longer hold power. The same cycles that once defined you begin to lose their pull. That's the sign you're being renewed. You're no longer reacting from old wounds. You're responding from new wisdom. But here's the part we often resist. Renewal doesn't come through avoidance. It comes through awareness. God doesn't simply remove pain. He transforms it into power. The moments that once broke you become the very foundation of your strength. The parts of your story you once hid become the very testimony that heals others. That's the mystery of grace. It turns what was once unbearable into something beautiful. You might think you're starting over, but you're not. You're starting from experience.io, from insight, from wisdom, from faith that's been tested and proven. Every loss, every delay, every heartbreak was not a detour. It was a refining. You are more grounded now, more discerning, more connected to your purpose. And this is the version of you that your future needs. Don't be surprised if as you grow, your circle shifts. Some people were connected to your wounds, not your healing. They recognized your brokenness, but can't relate to your wholeness. That's okay. It's not arrogance to outgrow what no longer aligns. It's alignment to honor what's true. God will surround you with people who speak to your becoming, not your surviving. And when they arrive, you'll know, because their presence will feel like peace, not performance. Be patient with yourself as you unfold. You're not late, you're in process. Transformation isn't instant. It's layered, it's sacred, and it's ongoing. You'll revisit the same lessons with new eyes, the same memories with more compassion, the same prayers with deeper understanding. And with each step, you'll realize that what once felt like loss was actually preparation. So when you look at the space between who you were and who you are becoming, don't fill it with fear. Fill it with gratitude. You survived the breaking. You embraced the waiting. And now you're ready for the becoming. The version of you that stands here today, grounded, wiser, more tender, more aware, is not who you were before the storm. It's who God intended all along. The future you prayed for is waiting, and it's waiting for the renewed you to arrive.